What is it, magical people? It's the Mystic here, and Daredevil is the newest Duelist character to be added in Season 4.5 of Marvel Rivals. And with his high mobility, his blind effects, and his grappling playstyle, he's sure to be formidable in the right hands. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down some of his kit and showing the most effective ways to counter each of his abilities, and by the end of today's video, you should have a good idea on what characters are going to make for effective counters against him. So if you're sick of getting beat up by the blind lawyer, stay tuned and I'll catch you soon. So before we actually get into what characters will make effective counter picks against Daredevil, we first need to understand his kit. So Daredevil's entire kit revolves around the Fury system. If you're unfamiliar, it's pretty similar to the Thor Force in the way that Thor is able to utilize it, and it lets you chain together certain abilities without having a cooldown time. So for his primary attack, Justice Jab, it's a basic attack and he gains Fury upon hit. Also mapped to the same button is the Righteous Cross ability, which he can use to follow up on any of his Fury abilities. Speaking of which, his next ability, Infernal Fury, consumes the Fury he's built up, allowing him to do one of two special abilities, which could either be his Devil's Chain attack, where he does a chain slam on the ground, or his Devil's Throw, which launches a projectile that ricochets between enemies, similar to Moon Knight's projectile abilities. Now, what makes the Infernal Fury ability so insidious is the fact that it doesn't have an actual cooldown, and instead consumes Fury. That means as long as you have the necessary amount of Fury built up, you can perform it. Not only that, you're able to follow up on any of the Infernal Fury abilities with the Righteous Cross, making it almost sort of a built-in combo system for him. And then you have his Devil's Latch ability, which he can effectively use as a grappling hook to either act as a quick escape or be used to grapple in enemies, similar to Bucky's bionic hook. And to make things worse, on completion of this ability, he gains Fury, and it can be followed up with Righteous Cross as well. And then he has his Objection ability, which effectively is a shield that can reflect back any enemy projectile, including ultimates, and when hit while blocking, he gains another Fury charge. And then the cherry on top of his entire kit is the Sonic Pursuit ability, where he's able to lock onto an opponent through walls, gaining not only a speed boost, but a damage reduction buff. He's also able to dash towards the target when he's in range, which not only blinds them, but also restores his Fury. And the thing with this ability specifically is that if you're able to KO the target that you've put on for it, it instantaneously resets the cooldown for it. I guess the only downside, if you could consider it a downside to this ability, is the fact that whenever he pins another player, they too can see the icon above his head, so they have some awareness that he is en route to jump them. And then if you combine this with his passive abilities that let him detect enemies through walls, and that allow him to climb and hang on walls, you get a pretty solid recipe for a formidable dive character. Not that he necessarily has to be used as a dive character, I'm sure you can play him on the front line pretty well, but I can also see some players getting off some devious plays by taking advantage of the fact that Daredevil can pretty much see where everybody is at as long as they're close enough. But finally, it's time to talk about his ultimate ability that is simply called Let the Devil Out. Now what this ability does is it applies a blind effect to anyone that's in a certain radius of him, and it also deals damage to anyone who's caught in his line of sight. Not only that, but his ultimate also gives him Fury as long as it's active, meaning that he can pair it with his Infernal Fury ability, and because of the fact that he can remain mobile while it's active, he basically becomes a walking kill box. Now there are going to be some interesting ways that you could counter this that we'll discuss later in the video, but if you're a squishy character, the best way to counter it is to just stay out of it. So some key things you're going to have to remember about his kit is that he thrives in mid to close range with his mobility, and his kit is all about chaining together multiple attacks to build Fury, which he can then use to gain passive health buffs or deal slowness debuffs. Many of his abilities are meant to be comboed together, and when done so effectively, they enable him to perform even more combos on top of that. And he can use the blind effects from his ultimate and Sonic Pursuit to disrupt the vision of any of his opponents and make him hard to chase. So if you are trying to be Daredevil's next victim, I recommend that you do not engage with him in a 1v1, especially if you are a squishy character. If you do decide to engage in a 1v1 versus him, I recommend that you have a character with high mobility that can quickly evade him and prevent him from getting more Fury, which can effectively interrupt his combo system. And then something else to remember is that his defensive tool Objection lets him absorb frontal damage and reflect projectiles briefly. So that means if you're a projectile character, you should really look out for his Objection ability and try to avoid attacking him when it is active. Same if you're a character that has a big projectile ultimate like, say, Magneto or even Iron Man. It's best to try to be aware of when he's using it and time your ult so that it doesn't match with that time window. But with all that in mind, the best ways to counter him, generally speaking, are going to be to try to force his abilities onto cooldown, force him to expend it while staying out of range so that he can't really chain it into anything else. And if you're able to bait him into using his abilities while avoiding their effective range, you can punish him when his abilities are on cooldown, making use of characters with grabs and other CC abilities. Another counter tip is to try to use long range and burst abilities to deal damage to him outside of his effective range. Remember, due to his passive ability, he can't see past a certain range, so if you have a long range hit scan character, you can effectively snipe him from across the map, and he has no counterplay to it. And like I said previously, try to avoid engaging with him in a 1v1, especially if you are a squishy character, because there's only one way that can end, and it's not going to be in your favor. But now that we've broken down all of his abilities and I've given you guys some general tips, let's go ahead and get into some specific counter picks that I think are going to be effective against Daredevil. And since I am biased, we're going to look at my favorite role first, being Vanguard characters. So here are some general tips for countering Daredevil as a Vanguard character. First, you're going to want to make use of your durability and survivability, and because a lot of Vanguard characters have high health pools, they naturally have a little bit more sustain, and they can force him to burn through his engagement tools, especially if they have some form of overshield in their kit. Also, using Vanguards that can apply some form of zone denial or shields to block his line of sight help make his overall kit a little bit less effective. Generally, it's a good play to try to force him to commit first and then follow up. You're going to want to bait out his Devil's Latch or his Sonic Pursuit or Infernal Fury, and then punish it when it's on cooldown. You should also try to utilize some Vanguard characters that have some crowd control abilities, including abilities that stun him or slow him, and as far as I know, his objection ability only reflects projectiles, so this means if you're a Vanguard, you should probably try to pick a brawler character that doesn't rely on projectiles for their kit. So with some of these things in mind, here are some Vanguards that I think are going to be effective counters. One has to be Emma Frost. Now, generally speaking, Emma Frost is pretty good against most Duelist characters, especially if you have to be within her effective range to deal damage to her. She can use her shield to quickly absorb some of the front-facing damage, and her diamond form gives her more sustain, and the ability to just straight up cancel Daredevil's ultimate with her command grab. And because Daredevil is forced to be in her effective range, Emma can generally use most of her kit to take advantage of that. But with that said, another effective Vanguard counterpick has to be Penny Parker. Now, while she relies on projectiles for most of her attacks, her entire kit is built around zone denial. And because Daredevil has to rely on being in a mid to close range in order for him to be effective, her Spider Nest and Spider Mines are going to be able to create a zone that becomes tricky for Daredevil to navigate through. She also has her Spider Web stun, which can effectively be used to either cancel his ult or just open him up to some of your teammates' offense. And she does also have some self-heal and some overshield, which gives her a little bit more sustainability. And speaking of zone denial, I think another effective Vanguard counterpick is going to have to be Groot, simply due to the fact that a lot of Daredevil's kit kind of builds off of itself, right? You need one ability to land in order to chain it into a different ability to chain it into a combo. So because Groot has one of the highest health pools of any Vanguard character, and he's able to just litter the battlefield with walls, he's able to tank a lot of damage from Daredevil, and he's able to throw up some shields to deny him sort of that combo ability of his kit. So naturally, Groot's going to be a pretty good frontline character against Daredevil. And then one more Vanguard character that I think could be good, but I'm a little tentative about, has to be Angela. Now, the reason I'm tentative about her is because she has a lower health pool compared to other Vanguard characters. Same with her shield health. So she doesn't really have the same sustain as other Vanguard characters, but I do think because she is highly mobile and she has some solid CC abilities, she can definitely apply some pressure to Daredevil. Things like her dash attack can disrupt his ult, and it can come in handy as sort of like backline defense if you see Daredevil starting to dive your support characters. Angela can peel very quickly, and then make use of her grab to displace Daredevil. And then because of his passive ability and his ultimate ability, both relying on distance, Angela really doesn't even have to be within his range for most of the time, right? She's high up in the air, so naturally he can't really reach her all the time, and she can just fly outside of his range of vision. So Angela in general has a lot of good utility against Daredevil, but we'll kind of just have to see how it ends up playing out this season. In general, there aren't going to be many Vanguard characters that are bad picks against him. I chose these ones because I think they have kits that specifically could counter a lot of his abilities. But even characters like, say, Thor or Hulk, or even the Thing are probably going to be effective against him as well, just because they have a lot of sustain and a lot of tricks up their sleeve. So kind of generally speaking, there aren't very many bad Vanguard picks. But with the Vanguard section of the video covered, let's go ahead and check out some of the Duelist characters that I think are going to be effective counter picks. When it comes to Duelist counter picks, we're looking at characters that can match or exceed his mobility, dodge his grapples, juke line of sight, or stay out of his line of sight entirely. We're going to want characters with high burst damage and CC combos to punish him while he's vulnerable and take advantage of the fact that his range of sight is so limited. So before I get into actual specific characters that I think are going to be good counter picks, I think it's going to be good to talk about the overall type of character that's going to be good at countering Daredevil. For one, that's going to be flying characters. When it comes to Duelist, there are a lot more options to counter brawlers compared to other classes of heroes. So Daredevil will likely have the same vulnerabilities to range characters and flying characters that many other brawler characters will have. So when it comes to flying characters, pretty much every single one acts as a good counter except for maybe like Iron Man, and that's only because Daredevil can reflect back his projectiles. So using Iron Man and trying to use his ult ultimately becomes a little bit risky. But then in terms of range characters, it kind of just becomes a matter of taking your pick. You're going to generally want characters that don't have a high damage drop off for distance for their primary projectile attacks. So this might be a character like Namor. And if you consider the fact that Daredevil might be used to dive, Namor is kind of sort of the go-to anti-dive character. And likewise, if you're not too afraid of being within Daredevil's effective range, you could maybe do like a Scarlet Witch. She's pretty high mobility and can stay out of range of a lot of Daredevil's combos, and the fact that Daredevil really can't see past a certain distance too, meaning he could probably easily be caught lacking. Like, it just kind of is what it is, right? If you have a Phoenix or a Hela or even like a Squirrel Girl who's just far enough away to not be seen, you can just fire pot shots at Daredevil from across the map. So these are kind of a bit more of the obvious counterplays. But now that we've got kind of the obvious out the way, I'm going to get into some specific, maybe like mid to close range counter picks for Duelists. These are going to be characters that I think might have some high sustain against Daredevil, and that could even maybe comfortably be in a 1v1 situation versus Daredevil. So starting off, I think the first character that fits sort of in this category is going to be Blade. I think Blade is going to be a good pick because he can maintain a relatively safe distance at first with his ranged attack, and then when Daredevil's low, he can easily clear that gap, activate his lifesteal ability, which has been buffed since launch, so it is a lot better, and he does have an attack that applies anti-heal. I think this means that there's going to be a lot of sustainability for a Blade who decides to engage in a one-on-one versus Daredevil. And you could even use like his dash ability as a getaway or an escape tool if necessary. So I think he can successfully apply a lot of pressure to Daredevil. But another character that I think is going to be interesting against Daredevil is going to be Mr. Fantastic. I think he's a good counter for a few reasons. For one, he does have a little bit further of an effective range than Daredevil. He has a grapple attack that can interrupt his combos, possibly even cancels all that. You know, I'd have to see that in practice, but his reflexive rubber and elastic strength abilities give him some good sustain when fighting against Daredevil, so he probably can't easily be burst down. And the elastic strength ability basically makes Mr. Fantastic a pseudo Vanguard. It lets him deal more damage, it gives him some overshield, and that can end up being the make or break in a brawl against Daredevil. Now, another interesting Duelist pick might be Spider-Man. I kind of say this apprehensively, but I feel like Spider-Man is very tricky. He's very mobile, and you can play him in such a way that really lets you choose what type of engagements you want to partake in when going against Daredevil. So while Daredevil might be able to do a lot of burst damage, I think Spider-Man is just going to kind of be Spider-Man and be able to avoid a lot of it, get sneaky shots here and there, and if Daredevil happens to be standing by like a ledge or something, get web pulled. And while he might not have like the highest sustain per se, he's not going to be a character that's going to be easy for Daredevil to secure kills on in a 1v1. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, there is Namor. With Namor, you can effectively play against Daredevil the same way that Namor would play against any brawl character or any dive character, and that's to lay down some turrets in the back line, make use of the protective bubble, all that good stuff. And Namor arguably has one of the best primary ranged attacks of any character in the game. He doesn't have to reload, there's no damage drop off. It's a little busted. So I think he's going to be a pretty solid pick against Daredevil. But yeah, kind of as I do these videos with different characters, I come to find that Duelists ultimately are kind of the most versatile class of characters. There's a lot of them. So I'm not going to like sit here and name every single one that I think could take on Daredevil pretty easily. But I think you guys got sort of a clear picture. He's basically going to be useless against flying characters, ranged characters, and characters with great mobility. And then having high sustained Duelists like Blade or Mr. Fantastic is also good too. But with that said, I think we're going to go ahead and move on to the strategist characters that I think are going to make effective counters. You see, as a strategist, your main ways of countering Daredevil is going to hinge on your survivability and your ability to disrupt his abilities and your damage output. So with that in mind, I think there's going to be a few strategists that are going to fit the bill. These two, of course, you know them, you love them. Or at least NetEase loves one of them a little bit too much. And that's of course going to be Luna Snow and Mantis. I just like to pair these two together because I think that they both have a pretty solid stun ability. Of course, when you're getting dived, landing that stun ability with Mantis or Luna Snow is going to be pretty crucial to shutting down that dive. And I think they have a relatively good amount of damage output that if they work together and have maybe a third character as like maybe a Duelist or a Vanguard who peels, I think that Daredevil really shouldn't be too big of an issue. Another character that I think is going to be completely unbothered by Daredevil has to be Ultron. Now, of course, Ultron kind of like more so falls into that flying duelist category if you really are thinking about it. He really is just built like a duelist who has some healing capabilities. But you know the drill on this one. He can fly around, he's ranged, he can stay out of Daredevil's effective range, he can deal damage, and he can use a healing drone on one of the backline strategists if they get dived. Not only that, but he has like one of the few offensive strategist ults. And I could see it being pretty effective against Daredevil's ult, right? Like as Ultron, if Daredevil ults, you can just ult at the exact same time and then just aim for anywhere in the sphere of Daredevil's ultimate ability. This way you can sort of punish enemies that are pushing up with Daredevil and who are in his range, and you can deal damage to Daredevil. But if you didn't know, Ultron's ult also heals allies, so any allies who are caught in it, Ultron is able to shoot down healing to them. So I can see Ultron's ult being pretty effective counterplays against Daredevil's ult. And to discuss some strategy characters that I don't think are going to be great against Daredevil, we had to talk about Invisible Woman and Loki, because the big thing about Daredevil is he can see them both whenever they go invisible, right? So that's not super effective. And sure, like Invisible Woman does have some CC, so there's always like an exception to that rule. Her ultimate is also going to be pretty good counterplays against Daredevil's ultimate. You just drop it down wherever Daredevil's at, and then you can like heal your allies while they're taking damage. But I think it's not very fun that you just kind of lose out on that aspect of Invisible Woman's kit. Same with Loki. Loki can disappear and go invisible, but Daredevil of course can see him too. So again, it's not it's not like these characters are specifically like no-go, but they do just happen to have a large chunk of their kits basically useless against Daredevil, so something to keep in mind. And then as far as like Rocket and Jeff, those are both squishy. If they get caught in a room alone with Daredevil, it's over. So I guess to summarize, you're going to want to prioritize strategy characters with stuns like Luna Snow and Mantis, and then Ultron is going to be a really strong pick as well. He gets all the same benefits that a flying duelist character would get against Daredevil, so you might as well pick him. But in conclusion, Daredevil is a potent duelist whose kit emphasizes mobility, debuffs, and managing his fury. His Devil's Latch, Sonic Pursuit, and his ult allow him to close the gaps, blind your sight, and outplay your vision-based setups. His objection stance can soak frontal pressure, and he can use his Infernal Fury to convert damage and slow you down. So in order to effectively counter him, you never want to allow him to grapple or dash for free. Make sure your team spreads out, use your terrain, use cover, and force misses. And then you can capitalize off of those misses while he's in cooldown. You should always be trying to interrupt or punish his ability usage in those moments when he's vulnerable. Interrupting his combos is going to be the key to making him less effective. And if you're a strategist or a duelist, you'll want to avoid being an isolated target against him. You're going to want to use long-range counterpicks or counterpicks with CC abilities that can exploit his mid-range weakness. He cannot deal damage to you if he cannot reach or see you, so try to remain outside his vision range. But with all of that said, if you liked this video and found it informative, be sure to hit that like button. If you're new here, you might as well subscribe. Comment down below if there's any ideas that I sort of missed in terms of countering him. I have been the Mystic, and I will catch you guys in the next one.